Thanks for checking out our podcast. If you are interested in learning more about writing, go check out our syndication page, seriouswriter.com, where you can find resources, articles, videos, topical classes, and the Brew podcast. Again, seriouswriter.com. We thank you for listening. All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Brew podcast. We are happy to be here with you guys. It's been a long week.
It has been a long week.
The elections have been held and I think tabulated and will be tabulated again.
I think there will be some further tabulations.
Hanging chaff.
Yes, back to 2000.
Yeah.
You could buy like little baggies of
hanging
chaffs.
That's hilarious. But we are not here to talk about the real elections or anything like that. We are going to give you the next chapter of our story.
That's right.
But first, we're going to talk about fiction works that have political tellings or stories within them.
That we think have done a good job.
Yeah, that we think have done a good job. Katie and I both went, ooh, Ender's Game. That was
so
Orson
good.
Scott Card. I think he did a great job. And especially when you start getting into the follow-ups.
Yeah, the follow-ups particularly.
Yeah, with Ender's Shadow.
Oh, man.
And Shadow the Hegemon and Children of the Hegemon.
No.
Oh, you're talking about Speaker for the Dead?
Speak for the Dead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that was such a good...
It depends which order you're reading them in, like the order they were written.
Yeah.
Or, if you jump into the other ones with like...
With Bean.
Yeah, with Bean, that's where they really get into the political stuff.
They get into a lot of political stuff.
But so well done.
Very well done. I would agree, not as much about Speaker for the Dead as political. Speaker for the Dead to me was a little more... Like those next two were more philosophical and kind of existential. But the Bean stuff was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Ender's Game, the first book definitely had the political stuff.
Yeah.
But the Bean, I don't remember how many books there were in that series, but they definitely had some very interesting political commentary. Because it's in the future, so he still got to use a lot of the cultural elements and bring in some of the history, but kind of shoot forward, like what would they really be like? And so I agree. I think those books did a really good job.
Yeah. I think another book that does a good job of bringing in kind of like the politics and things like that is the Eris series written by Britt Mooney. They do a great job of and I'm being serious here, like...
You know what? You say that, and it's interesting that you say that because I definitely wrote it to criticize a lot of history. Not criticize history, but bring out a lot of history.
Right.
And I've had people who were super conservative love that book.
Yeah.
Especially the first one. And I've had people who are super liberal love that book.
Right.
And it's one of those things where... And it goes into what I believe makes a good book or story that deals with politics. What makes it good is that you can learn from it for yourself.
You can identify with it.
You can identify with it. It's universal enough that anyone who is human, basically, right, will...
Even if it's about elves,
even
politics.
It's about elves and politics, but and all the kind of stuff that's in the Living Stone, which you can buy on Amazon for it. No, okay. And but I really did do that on purpose, and I think those stories that show that aren't one-sided. I think, and you guys can disagree, but I think if a book or a movie is one-sided in its political agenda, it weakens the story.
Yes.
And so, and I mean that even if I agree with the politics,
right?
Like even if I agree,
it can't be just from one side.
But if they only do it from one side, Brandon Sanderson has a great YouTube on this. I don't know if you've watched it, and he was talking about religion and politics in general. But he was saying if you do that, you will weaken your story. He said you have to have people disagree, and you have to have the reader identify with both sides.
Yes. Because
if they don't. Or you have to be equally critical of both sides of whatever that argument is. He said because it's flat characters aren't interesting to people.
Right.
And they're not even interesting villains. We talk about villains or whatever, even if you want to make a statement. And so I think that's one of the ways that, and I've got a couple examples, but I can stop talking now and let somebody else talk about some examples.
You're good. I've always enjoyed the adventure ones, like very D&D style, where they do include like a well thought out religious system and a well thought out political system.
Yeah, from a gaming aspect, from whether you're doing tabletop or a written role play or whatever, that the politicking is what I really enjoy in a story, because it's a completely different set of threats and problems to overcome.
Yeah. You're not just going to go and smash the political.
Yeah, because you can't.
Yeah.
And I think having that kind of conflict with that your main characters have to deal with, whether they're being targeted by whatever political organization that may be or part of it,
Right.
it brings a lot more interest to the story. And I haven't talked about the Hunger Games recently, but I'll say it, I enjoyed the second and third books more than the first, because it got into a little more of the politicking,
Yeah.
where it wasn't just a battle royale knockoff that the first was, but there was more. The stakes were very different, and there was a very different, like I said earlier, a very different threat to Katniss and her group.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the second and third one, although I think the second one was, in my opinion, just a little more of a rehash of the first one.
Yeah,
but at least they did. You're right. They brought in what's really, to me, important about dystopia is you're bringing in, like, why is this world dark? Like, what are the forces? What are the dark forces that are really at play here? Because you're right, the first one was just like a battle royale, and it did a good job just focusing on her character. I think it was good for that, but you're right, it brought that in more.
And the third one, you had the conflict with Snow, but also the conflict with the resistance leader, whose name I don't recall and don't really care to. But showing that even the people who call themselves the good guys have their own agendas and biases, and can be just as manipulative and not worse. And that requires a character to question things and to think things through, rather than just listening to an opinion and a bias that might be working for them, but also might not be.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that although I didn't really like the third book, I thought the third book was really weak, but I did like that part where she did a good job showing the agendas and the corruption of both sides.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important. And going back to why I said, if you're going to deal with politics or religion for that matter, in your stories, then the main character, or there has to be a character that feels caught in the middle. Because if you don't, not that they don't maybe lean to one side, because if you don't show that, then I think I think that's a universal thing. I think a lot of people feel caught in the middle.
Yeah.
And even if they might be extreme politically or religiously, I think it's very, and I think that's how you make it universal for people, is you show them caught in the middle, and then the reader is like, oh, well, I'll root for this, I'll root for that, or, oh, well, no, that's not right.
And then
they do that either.
You show them either standing for their principles or having to make, a little, what do you call it?
Compromises.
We have to make little
they
compromises.
Have to make compromises, and your character doesn't want to make compromises, and that's how people feel, and it helps to make it universal.
I hate making compromises.
Right? and I think most people do. I think most people, when you get into the real life, that's something that they struggle with, and so when you put that in your story, or you put the people who are corrupt on both sides making compromises that are realistic. Like, they can't be stupid, right? But they're realistic, and you're like, oh, well, I could see myself making that compromise.
Yeah.
But
especially in the circumstance.
But I'm glad the hero doesn't, the protagonist or whoever. So I've got two main suggest. I've got two main
Yeah.
examples. My first one is A Time to Kill by John Grisham, and it is actually the first book he wrote. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't realize this, and it was not published until The Firm.
Oh, okay.
So like he hit big with The Firm,
Yeah.
and he had this older manuscript called A Time to Kill, which if you read A Time to Kill, you realize why no one would publish this.
Right.
Like no one would actually.
Very hot topic.
Like no one would for an author's first book. No one would publish this. It's so, but it's such an amazing story, and it's such a controversial, hot topic. But I thought he did such a great job showing both on the liberal and conservative side in Mississippi or Alabama or Louisiana, I forget which southern state he was in, but it was literally the town he was from. Like he modeled this town after the town he was from as a southern lawyer. And so he goes into how, the liberals would come in and try to take advantage, and the conservatives would come in and take advantage, and all these political, religious things going on, trying to take advantage of this man who was trying to protect his daughter who had been raped. And like, it was such a powerful thing to me to see him do this and to write it in such a way. And then of course I think the movie is incredibly well done.
Is awesome.
The movie was really well done. But all that to say is he did a good job showing both sides, the corruption of both sides. And I think that made it a stronger story. I think there was a movie with was Kevin Kline is his name as an actor, called Dave, where he looks like the president. You remember this movie? He was like the body double for the president, and then the president actually does die.
Oh.
And so, but because he looks just like the president, like they prop him up as the president, but he's like a normal dude. But the whole movie is him exposing, like, you guys, no wonder you people don't get anything done. Like, you won't work together, you won't do what's important, and so. But that in and of itself was a very quote unquote political movie. But I think if you were liberal or conservative, everyone came out of that movie going, "Yep, that's what we would do." Like we would do this. We would do this to balance it. We would get in the middle of it and use real world solutions. It's kind of the everyday man kind of hero. And then there's a third one I just remembered, by R.A. Salvatore. If you don't know who he is,
I have heard.
He writes a lot of D&D stuff, and he's got one of my favorite characters who is Drizzt, and who is a dark elf who's like becomes a hero and goes against his nature, and he's one of those great characters.
Redemption arcs.
Oh man, I think he's a great character. But in one of the stories, it's called The Pirate King, and he got into this really cool area, Salvatore did, where he wasn't, in my opinion, he wasn't just writing stories to be cool D&D stories. Like, he started to write stories that were saying something. Like, he wrote The Orc King, where he actually humanized orcs in it somehow. And it worked. And I went, dude, and like nobody knows who this guy is, and it's kind of Pulp Fiction. Like those D&D stuff is kind of Pulp Fiction. But he wrote one called The Pirate King, and it was such an important look at the time of politics in America and the two sides and partisanship and all that kind of stuff. And there's still partisanship. It's not just now. It wasn't just then. But I remember reading it going, he did such a good job humanizing both sides and showing how both sides have legitimate concerns and how they wouldn't listen to each other and yada yada yada, all this kind of stuff. And so I just, those to me are the interesting ones. Those to me are the kinds where that's good writing, just to me.
Yeah. Another one that is done well, Game of Thrones. He does such a good job of being able to keep it about politics and keep it worked in there while still telling these really in-depth stories about these characters and how they weave, and how he can still surprise you, in a moment's notice. Like, this guy was supposed to be king, or he was king, and now he's not even in the story anymore. Okay, let's move on from there. But another one that I thought we might want to discuss a little, it was 1984.
Oh, that's a classic.
Yeah, very political in what he was talking about. And a lot of people would say, even like,
isn't that on the news every day? Isn't that what we're doing?
Pretty much. That's what they would say. Is it's a story that it kind of, I would say his main message is about censorship
and control
because they are working, the political, agenda is working to reduce the language to being smaller and smaller amounts of words, so that the words themselves give less freedom to what you can talk about and express, and what's acceptable words to use, and as well as they keep track of your schedule and what you eat and all kinds of.
It's like the original dystopian novel.
Yeah.
You have anything else?
Star Wars was bad politics.
I was not going to talk about Star Wars.
Well,
it was in the back of my mind.
But Star Wars is a great, and I think Star Trek is also an interesting, example, because Star Wars is definitely the flat bad guy character politics,
right?
And or any Nazi, like, let's just throw Nazis in, because we can kill as many Nazis in a scene, and no one feels bad. And put them in Indiana Jones, put them in, and it's the stormtroopers and a lot of that stuff. So I would agree that's an example of that's probably a weakness of Star Wars. I mean, they ended up humanizing Darth Vader more, but as far as the politics, like the rebellion, they're just all good guys. They're just all good people. And I think what's been interesting to me about Star Trek is, in the beginning, Roddenberry was trying to give us this utopian future. This is what we will get to. We'll get to this place. But as Star Trek writing, and as he died, and Star Trek writing has gone on, it's become more and more complex. Mm-hmm. They've showed the Federation doing more bad things,
right?
And being more corrupt, and like they've had to make it more complex for a modern day audience, because a modern day audience is like, there is no good political party or politics or government. Okay, like they're all doing, like, that's how most people think now.
Yeah.
And so you can't just have this, we're all good guys and don't do anything wrong, and then there's all those guys are just all bad or whatever. You just can't write that way.
Keeps it too flat. So I think that wraps up our suggestions of good stories with good politics and good writing.
Now go vote, right?
Yeah,
no, that was last week.
Yeah. I'm resisting a lot of jokes right now. A lot of. So Katie has a story for us.
She does.
Yes,
I do.
Episode 8.
Jump into that now.
We are going to jump in.
And thank you guys for being patient with us as we talk about political type things.
There you go.
Now we're getting to the story.
Let's get into the story.
Chapter 8. Recompense. Trace Whitaker stood on the porch of his outpost, nursing the cigarette cherry. The smoke hung low, telling of the coming storm front. There'd be snow tonight. The hitching rail took his weight as he watched the dim shapes of 3 riders cresting the horizon, and he shifted, working to alleviate the deep pain of his broken leg. He was a man of means. Folks like him relied on appearance, and despite the injury, he would greet his people standing. An hour had passed since Callie ambushed him, fired on him, broke his leg, stole his horse, stole his ledger, and left him here to die. And for what? The withered old hag was bitter her ways were changing, and the landscape would soon be inhospitable to her folk and her saurians. He had offered her more money and freedom than she had ever laid eyes on. With his own money, he had made the people of this impoverished hollow rich, and yet she had the gall to come here, out of her way, to hurt him. The sound of hoofbeats echoed across the cold, dry scrub now, and he breathed a low sigh of relief, wreathing himself briefly in smoke. His men were returning from a patrol of his newest property. He was lucky they'd started the route early. The outpost had no stove, and without a horse he'd have had a long and difficult night. "Gentlemen!" Trace roared as the 3 men dismounted and walked up to the porch. Elijah gave him a long look over, surely noting his pallor, but Trace waved him on. "We have a small change in plans." Elijah tossed his head. "What happened? Where's your horse?" "Oh, you know," Trace said, and eased now into the chair he'd pulled out of the house. "Just got a visit from our good friend, Callie O'Shea. She thought she had something to say to me, but I think she just moved up her schedule for us." The men exchanged glances and toothed grins. That's good to hear, Wen said slowly, questioningly. Trace nodded and took a long draw on a cigarette. Among her other actions today, she stole my ledger, took pot shots at me like a coward, and stole my horse. I think it's time we got our lawman back and do some inquiring. Y'all ever hear of this red scarf of the wind? There was some grumbled musing before the shortest of the three spoke up. Ain't that some Indian legend? Some sort of venging spirit? Legend, maybe, but ain't nothing spirit about it, Trace said. This red scarf was a bounty hunter, a long while back. Got a reputation for being damn good at the job. Real sharpshooter, too. Last anyone heard of her was, 15 years ago or so. Her? Elijah said, squinting. Trace replied with a nod. I think it's time we start asking some questions around here. Good to know who our neighbors are. Y'all rest up for a minute. When the horses are ready, I'm going to need some help getting home. Elijah, you're going to make a house call for me. It was evening by the time Elijah made it to the O'Shea Ranch. He sniffed, nose wrinkling at the stench of decaying carcasses still in the air. Callie must have lost a good number of Soreros in the stampede, Elijah mused. Shame, really. They were handsome beasts and would have fetched a pretty penny at the market. His gaze traveled over the newly repaired corral and outbuildings. A ranch like this wasn't equipped to butcher a lot of livestock. With all the repairs done to the buildings, it didn't seem like they would have had time to salvage much. Pity. Out here, a loss like that was devastating to a small rancher. In the shadow, Crashers paced in the pen and something caught his horse's attention from the barn. Elijah urged the mare on and wound his way up to the house. Dismounting, he left his rifle tied to the saddle, but traced his hand over the handle of his pistol at his side before striding up to the porch. The door opened before he could knock. Cecil, Elijah said, giving Callie's Indian a long look over. Is Miss O'Shea home? Cecil returned the look before shaking his head. No. What do you want? Just what was stolen from Mr. Whitaker this afternoon. She wouldn't happen to have brought back a ledger today, did she? Again, Cecil shook his head. Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen anything like that. Elijah gave a slow nod and looked past Cecil's shoulder into the house. All right, then. You got the sheriff in there? Seems like I've got a matter to discuss with him, and he's been missing in town. Trace would hate to have to find somebody else to do the job. A town needs a lawman, after all, he said, raising his voice. The clip of boots approaching the door sounded before Cecil could stop Arthur. He settled just outside the doorway. Elijah, Arthur said. Sheriff Morris. Elijah tipped his hat respectfully. I have a matter to discuss with you on behalf of Trace Whitaker. I understand if you want to take this elsewhere, considering it's a matter of conflict of interest. Arthur scowled. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Very well. Trace Whitaker is seeking to press charges against Callie O'Shea on account of stealing his private property, personal injury, and damage to personal property. Elijah watched as Arthur and Cecil exchanged brief glances before the young lawman piped up. Striking a man for insult isn't against the law, Elijah. Elijah nodded. But firing on an unarmed man unprovoked and stealing his horse and affects is. A snarl twitched across Arthur's face. Firing on a man unprovoked? Why, it's you that ought to be facing charges. Elijah leveled a cool eye on Arthur and held it steady there. For what, Sheriff Morris? The men who shot at you are dead. I had nothing to do with what happened out there. For what it's worth, you have my most sincere condolences, and it warms my heart to see you up on your feet and ready to accomplish your duties in town. He canted his head and shrugged. Unless you find that you must recuse yourself from this situation, in which case I'll let Mr. Whitaker know he'll have to deal with things on his own. We wouldn't want any animosity to come twixt you and Miss O'Shea. That won't be necessary, Arthur growled. Sheriff Mackenzie left me in charge here, and I aim to fulfill that duty. Elijah smiled. Good. Trace will be pleased to hear that you'll be cooperating with him. He expects the ledger back in his hands, in full and untampered with, by noon tomorrow. Have a good night. He tipped his hat again, then turned around and left. From the paddock, he glimpsed sight of a crasher with a fresh bullet track across its knobby skull before it faded back into shadow. The morning dawned bright and crisp, with fresh snowfall dusting the ground. By mid-morning, it would be melted away in the sunlight, but it was a harbinger of what was to come. A knock rapped on Trace Whitaker's bedroom door. "Come in," he called, shifting himself with a wince as he sat up in his desk chair. A thin man, short of stature and of an ugly face, stepped through the threshold. "What is it, Collins?" "Telegram for you, from the Pinkertons in Silver City. Elijah's just arrived and will be in shortly." Collins handed Trace the folded telegram and stepped back. "Good. Thank you. Tell Elijah to take his time unless he's got something worth saying. I'll ring for you when I need you. And tell the good doctor to wait a minute before he goes. I may have need of him yet. You may go." Collins tipped his head and closed the door behind him, leaving Trace with the telegram. He opened it and read it with a growing smile. Just what we needed. Silver City, Texas Republic, Pinkerton Detective Agency. Sending James Brooks with information on next coach. Stop. Much to tell about Red Scarf. Stop.
Boom.
Nicely
That's
done.
got a nice little boom there.
Nicely done.
Nicely
Sorry.
done. I like the hint that there's, something going on and sending messages about the red scarf. I like
Yeah.
that. That was
No,
good.
I like that there's
That
like
was a good setup.
they're digging that up actively. And I love the perspective, the point of view from his point of view. Because I was hoping we would get to that at some point.
Yeah.
And that was probably the perfect time to do it.
Honestly, I had no idea what to do with Callie after your last chapter,
Yeah.
and so just said, scratch it, just changing the point of view.
And it worked. It worked
It did
well.
work.
Yeah.
Because it adds so much more to the tension of.
We got to see a scene from Darth Vader's point of view. I mean,
Right,
at least
yeah.
at some point.
Yes. Yes.
No, I thought that was a good idea. It was good. Well done.
Very
Thank
nice.
you.
We need to
To
spin
our
the
folks.
wheel of death and doom and destruction,
Malfortune.
or being whelmed. As you're about to spin it, I heard something today, like, people say someone is ruthless. Like, you never say
who is
someone
ruth?
has a lot of ruth.
No, yeah.
Like, you can say they're ruthless, but like, who has a lot of ruth? I
just
don't
like
get it.
being whelmed.
Just like
No
being
one
whelmed.
is. No one is whelmed.
No one's whelmed.
But you're always underwhelmed.
Like, do you ever have just an aster? There's always just a disaster. There's always just.
Right. Right.
Where did this come from? This is so silly.
All right, let's do it.
And
Let's
here's
spin.
the spin. And we are coming up on natives. The natives, are one of your options.
This is for me, right? I'm writing next, right?
This would be for Brit.
Okay.
And second, we have saurians.
Ooh.
So dinosaurs or natives?
Dinosaurs are natives, so.
Yes.
Okay.
That can be fun.
All right.
Yes, and so if you guys are interested in hearing more of the story, check in with us throughout the rest of this year. We'll be wrapping it up probably around after Christmas time.
After Christmas, I think.
Might
but we'll
even be,
see.
yeah. It might stretch into the new year. 2021 is around the corner.
I know,
I
man.
know.
Goodness.
But in case you guys were wondering what we were drinking on tonight, we have got a case of the Monday Night Brews.
Some good old faithful brews, man.
Yes.
These are some great guys in a great brewery.
Yeah, Brit's drinking on the Drafty Kilt, which is a Scottish ale, probably one of my favorites from
Not
them.
an actual kilt.
No,
This is a beer.
And then I've got a Dr. Robot, which is a key lime sour, which sounded very interesting to me. It's very crisp and refreshing.
Yeah?
It wouldn't normally be the first thing I reach for, but because it sounded so different and I was questioning whether or not...
And it's got robot in the name.
And yeah, it's a robot.
I mean, that right there.
Yes. Just to tee you guys up a little bit, to keep an ear out for... We're definitely going to be having some episodes for Mandalorian Season 2
Oh, that
coming
is
out.
true.
There are already 2 episodes at this
That is
point, and
true.
we're gonna pack a couple of them together. But don't worry, it is coming.
Don't worry. We will give you some spoiler-filled episodes.
Yes.
Because, and it's funny that we kind of joke about it, but at the same time, people really listen to these things. Like,
Yeah.
it's consistently one of the most listened to things that we do.
Are they Interbrew review
Are the
episodes?
interbrews.
Yeah.
And maybe because they're standalone, maybe, people
It's
are
easier to
like,
just jump into.
like they don't want to jump into the story. They're like, oh, I can just listen to maybe one of those or
Yeah.
something. But no, when I look at the downloads, those are always growing.
Very nice.
So-
Yeah, so we're happy to keep those going for you guys. And hot take, the first 2 episodes, I've been very happy with. Very pleased.
They're good. I don't know that I don't know if I like them as much, but
As the
but
first season?
yeah, but I do like them a lot.
Yeah. Did you hear that they're taking the most recent Disney movies and putting them into legend rather than canon?
No, I did not hear that.
Yeah, we'll have to fact check that
we'll
one.
have to fact check that.
But yeah,
Seems like they should have done a little more prep work before they spent all that money on bad writing.
y'all. Yep. Well, as always, we're happy to have you guys here with us and listening.
Like and share.
Yeah, like,
Get it
share,
out there.
comment, and make sure you raise that glass of inspiration
Or
can.
a robot. Can.
and stay inspired, guys.
Can we talk about Left Behind? Because that's the one
Sure.
that most people
Oh
should
yeah, that too.
Hated those books.
The first one was
I got through,
not,
like,
not that I
6.
agreed with all of the theology.
Yeah.
But the first one was decent. Mm-hmm. And literally, I got to the end of the second one, and I mean, I was in my early 20s, and I was like,
Yeah.
that's not a good book.